Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Kira Zeidelman. I'm a technical manager at the Center for Partnerships and Innovation at NARUC, and I'm pleased to introduce today Commissioner Anthony O'Donnell. Commissioner O'Donnell is co-chair of the Nuclear Energy Partnership between the U.S. Department of Energy and NARUC, and he's also chair of the NARUC Subcommittee on Nuclear Issues Waste Disposal. And as we get started, I just want to thank the U.S. Department of Energy for sponsoring this report and our activities through the Nuclear Energy Partnership. So Commissioner O'Donnell, over to you.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you for joining the NARUC DOE Nuclear Energy Partnership for today's presentation on NARUC's recently published white paper, Nuclear Energy as a Keystone Energy Resource. Through the NARUC DOE partnership, NARUC works closely with members of the Nuclear Energy Nuclear Energy Partnership. The partnership provides opportunities for state public service commissioners and commission staff to better understand barriers and opportunities related to the U.S. nuclear fleet. It also provides education and information to state commissioners and staff on important issues surrounding the use of nuclear energy technologies. I'm pleased to welcome everyone to today's presentation on nuclear as a Keystone Energy Resource, which explores nuclear energy's role in providing carbon-free electricity and highlights key considerations for regulators to keep in mind as decarbonization efforts continue across many states and utilities. Today's webinar will feature Philip Grader and Diksha Anand from Energy Ventures Analysis. Philip and Diksha authored the Nuclear as a Keystone Clean Energy Resource white paper that was released just today. Today's webinar will be recorded and the recording and slides posted on NARUC's website and emailed to attendees next week. We thank the Department of Energy Office of Nuclear Energy for their support of NARUC's research and technical assistance on nuclear energy issues. Please enter questions into the Q&A box and we will get through as many as possible following the presentations. If you would like to be unmuted to ask a question, please raise your hand and NARUC staff will assist you. So now let me welcome our panelists for today. Philip Grader is a manager at Energy Ventures Analysis. As part of EVA's environmental and energy consulting team, Mr. Grader specializes in integrated analysis of natural gas, coal, power, and emission allowance markets. Utilizing his unique educational background in engineering management with a focus on energy economics and finance, Mr. Grader develops sophisticated analyses and reports that invite quantitative discussions on the current and future impacts of energy regulations, policies, and legislation on the North American energy sector. Additionally, Mr. Grader has prepared numerous economic and regulatory impact studies on a wide-ranging array of issues regarding the U.S. energy sector for clients, including state regulatory commissions, federal agencies, trade associations, and private companies. Diksha Anand, a senior integrated energy analyst with EVA. She joined them in 2019 after graduating with a master's degree in chemical engineering from Cornell University, specializing in energy economics and engineering. At EVA, Ms. Anand works as a senior integrated energy analyst across all energy commodities, including renewables, emission markets, coal, and electric power. Leveraging her unique educational and professional background, Ms. Anand plays an integral role in improving the accuracy of EVA's vast suite of energy and economic models. Ms. Anand assists in various consulting projects across the energy space and helps meet the objectives laid out by her clients. And so now I turn it over to our presenters, Philip and Diksha.
Thank you, Commissioner, for those kind words, for the kind introduction. And thank you for NARUC and staff to allowing us to present today's slides and kind of give everyone here a chance to view some of the highlights, or that we picked at some of the highlights of the quite lengthy report, and give the opportunities to ask us some initial questions that you might have at the end of the presentation. I understand we just released the white paper earlier today, so I don't think we would expect anyone to have already gone through the 50+ pages. So if there are any questions, again, after you have had a chance to review the paper and maybe listen again to the recording and everything, We have included our email addresses here in the slide deck as well, so feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer any and all questions that you might have. Before we get started with going through the report, just wanted to introduce ourselves. Once again, we are Energy Ventures Analysis. We are an energy consulting firm located in the DC metro area and have been around since 1981. We're specializing mostly on publishing commodity price forecasts for all the major energy commodities, but also integrated analyses and reports, and really our clientele really covers the entire energy space, including organizations like NARUC and the paper that we're presenting here to you today. For the outline for today's presentation, we first want to give you a brief overview of the current U.S. nuclear fleet and what we see as some of the unique role and opportunities that the nuclear fleet plays today. They give you some background on what is the current technology that is used in today's operating nuclear reactors, and also what are some of the advanced nuclear technologies that you've heard so much about in the news and probably in some of your most recent regulatory filings. We do want to spend a little bit on the treatment and support of nuclear energy on a federal and state level. Again, there have been some major changes here over the last couple of weeks. I think we're all very much aware of the recent passing of the Inflation Reduction Act, so we do want to highlight a few key points and how they apply to the nuclear fleet here today. And then we want to go through some of the potential states for retaining and expanding their nuclear fleet, and maybe highlight some other states that currently maybe not have nuclear energy and that could potentially look into maybe adding nuclear energy into their portfolio mix in the future. And last but definitely not least, we want to highlight some of the how the public utility commissions across the country, what their role is in maybe helping and advancing and ensuring that nuclear maintains its role as a keystone clean energy resource in the future of the U.S. electricity mix. So first, again, just a brief overview of where we currently stand today. As you are maybe aware, nuclear is one of the major electricity generating resources in the country. In 2021, it contributed about 20% or 1/5 of the total electricity generated in the U.S., just very closely behind coal generation, which was unthinkable just a decade ago. So we've seen some major changes here. And more importantly, even nuclear generation provides over almost 50% or half of the carbon-free electricity that the U.S. has generated in 2021. So that's quite a significant number in our pursuit of decarbonizing the U.S. electric grid here in the future. Today, there are 14 states that have passed some form of legislation or regulation that requires the electricity mix to be carbon-free by mid-century, and Diksha will highlight those states a little bit later on in the presentation. So as you can see, maintaining and possibly expanding that, the nuclear fleet is key for us to meet those decarbonization goals that a lot of these states have set and by mid-century. So first, brief overview of the current U.S. nuclear fleet. Since June, we are down to 92 commercial nuclear reactors that are operating in the United States, with just a little bit less than 98,000 megawatts, and they're operating across 28 different states. On the map to the right, in green are the reactors or the nuclear plants highlighted that are currently operating. Red, the recently retired ones, and in yellow, the only currently under construction nuclear plant or about to be online nuclear plant, which is Vogtle in Vogtle units 3 and 4 in Georgia. We also try to provide a little more information. We size them by capacity and also the shapes in terms of if they're operating in a regulated or a non-regulated electricity market. Constellation Energy is the owner of almost 1/4 of all the operating nuclear reactors. For all that are not quite familiar with the name Constellation Energy, that's a recent spinoff from Axelon Corporation, and they're mostly focused on their carbon-free electricity portfolio, so renewables and nuclear energy. The other big players in the US are Duke Energy, TVA, Southern, and Dominion Energy. Those are the top 5. And actually, the top 10 largest companies in terms of nuclear capacity own almost 80% of that total capacity. So you can see on the chart on the bottom right, we've really gone through 2 major waves of nuclear plant builds or completions. The first one happening during the 1970s and the second one during the 1980s, where we're facing a very different regulatory environment as we do now, and also with a significant electricity demand growth that we have not really seen since that time period. As a matter of fact, we've actually only completed 1 nuclear reactor since 1996, and that was Watts Bar 2 at TVA in Tennessee. And like I mentioned earlier, there are only 2 more reactors currently under construction, and those are Georgia Power's Vogtle 3 and 4. Talking a little bit about nuclear energy's unique characteristics and why is it an invaluable asset in today's electricity grid? Well, I want to start, and as we're going through the research and everything, this was kind of popped out to us, and was that nuclear actually has by far the lowest or the highest reliability rating of any technology or fuel type in the U.S. NARUC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, actually tracks these so-called unforced outage rights, or EFORT, by technology and fuel type. And as you can see on the charts to the right, nuclear here differentiate between the pressurized water reactor and boiling water reactor. Diksha will go into it a little bit more later on. As you can see, they're by far the lowest compared to the other technologies. Additionally, nuclear, for various different reasons, operates in what we call baseload mode, where electricity is provided at a steady rate around the clock, mostly due to their variable cost compared to other non-renewable generating resources like coal and natural gas. Additionally, some non-electricity related impacts here. Nuclear power plants, generally because of their size and the amount of electricity that they're generating and the workforce employed, they're also some of the largest local and state taxpayers, and as I said, employers in those energy communities that they're located in. So they're quite important to those communities. And last but not least, once we start thinking about how we're replacing the vast amount of coal retirements and maybe eventually natural gas retirements in our pursuit to decarbonize the electric grid, we do have to think about the land required to replace that capacity. And nuclear, as you can see on the table to the right, and it's explained in a little more detail in the paper as well, has the lowest land requirement to replace, here an example, 1,000 megawatt coal plant compared to solar and wind. Now, however, there have been some struggles that the nuclear fleet has seen over the last few years, and this is mostly something to do with the amount of energy revenue that these plants have created over the course of the year. With a rise in especially wind generation in central US states, you're looking at SPP, ERCOT, MISO power markets, power prices in those energy markets really fell off during those off-peak hours. So off-peak, we generally refer to late night to early morning hours when electricity demand is at its lowest. And then on the flip side to that, power prices during on-peak hours, so meaning during your day hours, have also fallen because of the drop in natural gas prices that we've witnessed here over the last now 12, 14 years. And as I mentioned before, nuclear power plants are operating essentially at 100% utilization rate throughout the day. So we consider them so-called price takers, meaning that they operate no matter what the power price is at a given moment. So that has substantially eroded some of these energy revenues that especially nuclear plants in deregulated markets have received. So as an example here, in the top right chart, you see in the blue bars this is an example for Quad Cities. It's a nuclear power plant owned by Constellation Energy in the PJM ComEd market. So that's located in Northern Illinois. And we're juxtaposing the cost of that nuclear power plant to the average power price or wholesale power price in that region that the power plant is located in. And the red line, you can see the share of hours when that power price was below the production cost for that nuclear power plant. And as you can see, especially over the last years, that share has significantly grown just over the last decade. And as I said, that's really eroding the energy revenue and has forced quite a few nuclear retirements, most recently the Palisades nuclear plant in Michigan in May. And so as you can see on the chart to the bottom right, we highlighted in red the recent retirements or announced retirements. Since 2013, we've retired almost 11,000 megawatts of nuclear generating capacity. While some of the earlier retirements might have been due to some other structural issues or some major capital investments, some of the later or more recent retirements were due to that economic erosion. So again, I already talked about Palisades. I think Pilgrim Energy's Pilgrim plant in Massachusetts is another example. Vermont Yankee in Vermont, and some other plants. Currently, we have only one other nuclear plant that is announced to close, Diablo Canyon. I'm sure everyone who's invested in nuclear energy is following very closely what's going on in California and that tug of war about keeping the plant on or not. That's our only announced retirement currently. However, you can see in gray, these are our current or the amount of capacity with their current license operating license expiration dates. So you can see, especially in the early to mid 30s, that's when we'll have another wave of these license expirations. And I hope after today's presentation or going through the report, you'll see why we're advocating for doing our best to extend those operating license beyond their current expiration date. With that, I would like to turn it over to Diksha to again give us some overview about the technologies that we're discussing today and some of those recent state and federal policy changes. Diksha?
Thank you, Philip. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here and discuss advanced nuclear reactor systems. Since the first commercialization of civil nuclear reactors in the early 1960s, reactor technology has constantly been evolving and upgrading in terms of performances, costs, and safety. All the 92 operating nuclear reactors that we have in the US market use light water reactor technology for power generation. Of them, 2/3 of them are pressurized water reactors, while the rest are boiling water reactors. And the primary distinguishing feature between the two is the presence of steam in the primary loop. While conventional reactors were built on a large scale to capture economies of scale, the focus is now shifting towards smaller and modular designs. Advanced reactor designs currently under development incorporate enhanced characteristics such as inherent safety features, modular design, greater fuel utilization, enhanced reliability, ability to integrate with non-electric applications, and so on. These reactors, as you can see on the chart to your right, are broadly classified in terms of size or the cooling agent that is utilized. In terms of size, they may be microreactors with capacities ranging of 1 to 20 megawatts, or small modular reactors, which are in the range of 20 to 300 megawatts, or full size. And based on the heat transfer medium, these can be water-cooled or non-water-cooled reactors. Some of the non-water-cooled reactors that we're seeing in the market include liquid metal reactors, salt and sodium cooled reactors. In the works, we have NuScale's small modular reactor, TerraPower's Natrium, which is a sodium fast reactor with a molten salt storage system, and X-Energy's XC100, which is a high temperature gas cooled reactor. But amongst all of them that we have in the development pipeline currently, NuScale's SMR design is the only one that has received final design approval from NRC. Moving on to the next slide. As utilities and states and countries venture into economy-wide decarbonization, nuclear energy, like we mentioned before, can significantly contribute to achieving these emission reduction goals. In the power sector, for example, during low demand periods or at times of negative power pricing, the excess energy and heat generated from nuclear reactors can also be diverted to thermal energy storage or utilized for hydrogen production. So hydrogen production can work as an energy storage proxy. And in that manner, nuclear energy can better achieve synergies and complement variable wind and solar generation. Nuclear energy can also go beyond the power sector to decarbonize other hard-to-abate or difficult-to-electrify industries. This is through the process of cogeneration, which basically means, in addition to feeding electricity to the grid, the excess heat from the nuclear reactor can also be utilized to meet heating demands for purposes like desalination, district heating, industrial process heating, and so on. Some hard-to-abate industries like steel making, aluminum production, oil extraction can also benefit from nuclear cogeneration. And this is by no means a novel concept. There are several nuclear cogenerating reactors across the globe. There are a few district heating nuclear reactors in Europe. There are some that have industrial process heating capabilities as well in Canada, Germany, India, and Switzerland. DOE awarded funds to demonstrate a few integrated nuclear energy projects, which produce clean hydrogen from nuclear energy. And one of the main examples are Exelon, well, now Constellation Energy, and Nel Hydrogen's partnership to demonstrate hydrogen production at the 9 Mile nuclear station. Advanced reactor developers are already considering using brownfield sites of retired or decommissioned nuclear and coal power plants to take advantage of the existing transmission rights, cooling water systems, and workforce that's already in place. Some of the big examples include TerraPower and their collaboration with PacifiCorp to demonstrate the Natrium sodium fast reactor at the soon-to-be retired Norton coal plant. X-Energy and Dow Chemicals have also recently announced their collaboration to deploy their SMR with the intent to produce power and process heat to one of the Dow Chemical facilities. Moving on to the next slide. We'll be talking a little bit about sources of uranium and spent nuclear fuel disposal. So in the early years, federal government subsidies and trade barriers led to sort of a gold rush in American uranium mining, and domestic production peaked back in the 1980s. But after the trade protections were lifted, increased competition from higher grade and low cost ore countries, and also dumping of subsidized uranium supplies from countries like Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan led to a severe decline in domestic production. In 1993, the megatons to megawatt agreement was also executed between Russia and United States, which required downblending Russian highly enriched uranium over the course of 20 years to produce low enriched uranium for use in US nuclear reactors. Now, while this helped out in terms of energy supply in the US, it also provided direct competition to US uranium producers and crowded out the domestic uranium production market. Following that, in 2011, the Fukushima nuclear disaster also drove the shutdown of many existing nuclear reactors and the cancellation of proposed new reactors, which created a global uranium oversupply and depressed global spot prices. So as a result, domestic producers started cutting back on production due to higher operating costs. And at present, US nuclear power plant operators rely mostly on imports and inventories to cover their fuel requirements. Definitely the geopolitical disruptions that we're seeing now with the Russia-Ukraine war has caused US and other countries in the European Union to reevaluate their energy mix and dependence on other countries. In recent times, there's definitely more urgency and more funding as well through the Infrastructure Reduction Act, Inflation Reduction Act, and a few other bills to rebuild the domestic uranium supply chain. Just briefly about spent nuclear fuel disposal techniques. Utilities are currently storing the spent nuclear fuel on site in dry gas storage, and the country is yet to develop a consolidated interim storage facility or a permanent disposal repository, which would be more of a long-term solution to spent nuclear waste. State renewable portfolio standards and clean energy standards have long been drivers of clean energy adoption. So the RPS or CES is essentially a requirement for state electric utilities to source a minimum percentage of their electricity from renewable or clean energy sources by a certain date. And the distinction between the two is essentially based on how the states define renewable and clean. The map here shows the states RPS or CES goals by a certain date, with the darker shades of blue indicating a higher percentage required. For the RPS, that includes renewable energy technologies like solar, onshore wind, offshore, geothermal, tidal energy, small hydroelectric plants as well. But the CES would expand the list of accepted energy resources to also include emission-free sources like nuclear energy or fossil with carbon capture. At present, we have 30 states, Washington, DC, and Puerto Rico that have binding RPS or CES goals. Now, while some states have specific policies in place, like the zero emissions credit, which target and support existing nuclear generation, others also others have pursued a different route. Though they don't incentivize nuclear energy specifically, they still include all zero emitting technologies like nuclear in their CES eligible technology umbrella. So New York, New Jersey, and Illinois have a zero emissions credit program. This provides additional revenue stream to nuclear plants that are at risk of closure. Now, the ZECs are essentially a state-created subsidy instrument that would reflect the zero carbon emission attribute of nuclear generation. So the state law would require utilities to purchase a certain amount of ZECs at a state-determined price, and participating nuclear plants would receive the ZEC payment from utilities. The passage of these bills have definitely helped reverse decisions to retire a few nuclear plants in the past, so that has definitely helped states to retain nuclear plants. Some states have also passed laws which allow tax exemptions or incentives for nuclear associated property. And states like Idaho, Virginia, and Washington established like task forces to really look into existing nuclear reactors as well as support new reactor development. And there are also a few states over the last few years like Wisconsin, Kentucky, and Montana that have removed bans on the construction of new nuclear reactors. Moving on to the federal side. So as we all have heard, the Inflation Reduction Act that was recently signed into law, it includes many provisions that can boost nuclear energy's growth and aid in the energy transition. The big highlights are the production tax credit that is offered for existing nuclear plants. There's also a technology neutral production tax credit and an investment tax credit for clean electricity technologies. Plants are given the option of availing one of both. The bill also includes significant investments for research, development, and production of domestic HALEU fuel. That's high-assay, low-enriched uranium fuel, and that's what would be utilized for the next wave of advanced reactors that are coming into play. The bill also includes additional incentives, which include like a bonus percentage that can be stacked up in addition to these tax credits. Some of them are based on whether the facility is located in an energy community. This means an area that had significant oil and gas employment, or a retired coal plant, or decommissioned nuclear power plant on site. The bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed last year also includes a civil nuclear credit program that would provide funds to prevent the premature closure of existing nuclear reactors. DOE also had launched an advanced reactor demonstration program, which uses Congress appropriated funding. It establishes public-private partnerships to accelerate the deployment of advanced nuclear reactors. And our paper outlines a few of those reactors that have received those awards. Lastly, the 2005 Energy Policy Act also established an advanced nuclear production tax credit, which can be availed on a first-come, first-served basis by the first 6,000 megawatts of advanced reactors that are deployed. And this includes any technology that was licensed by NRC after 1993. So all of the policies and incentives that we've highlighted at the federal level in tandem with state regulations can help support existing nuclear reactors and also advance new reactor build out. I'll hand it over to Philip now.
Thank you, Diksha. Thank you. That was very informative. And I think especially here on the last slide, on the federal side, there are a lot of exciting things that, some of our expert and industry observers are really excited about and hope to steward in maybe another wave of nuclear deployment like we've seen in the 70s and 80s on that previous chart. Really just tailing off of like what Diksha already said, like now looking into some other states where retaining the existing nuclear fleet becomes key, and maybe highlighting a few more. We're also expanding the nuclear fleet, or establishing even a nuclear fleet to begin with, could be quite important. And during our research analysis, we really found this chart that you see on the right really very telling. Again, this is the 2021 share of carbon-free electricity generation by fuel type by state. So not just the entire US. You can see at the very top, this was the pie chart that we saw earlier, where for the total US, nuclear provides almost half of all the carbon-free electricity in 2021. And below that, you can now see it broken out by state. We also highlighted with a green box the states, as Diksha mentioned earlier, that currently have a binding 100% clean energy standard by mid-century. So that it actually includes our number one nuclear electricity generator, the state of Illinois. It also includes other states like North Carolina, New York, Virginia, Connecticut, California, Maryland, Commissioner O'Donnell's beautiful state of Maryland, in my former home state actually, and the state of Washington. So obviously those 8 where we do have established nuclear fleet, retaining the nuclear power plants in those states obviously is key to meeting those ambitious decarbonization goal by mid-century. It's also worth highlighting here that we actually have 6 states that do have a 100% clean energy standard by mid-century, that do not have any operating nuclear power plants as of now, and that includes Colorado, Hawaii, Maine, Massachusetts used to have a nuclear power plant. That was the Pilgrim power plant, as I mentioned, but is now down to 0, as well as New Mexico and Oregon. Additionally, we also have 12 states that now before used to include West Virginia and Indiana, but we still have a few states where we have some significant barriers to the development of nuclear power plants. One state, Minnesota, actually outright bans it as of now, as the current legislative environment stands. And there are quite a few that where nuclear power plants would need either voter approval or actually legislative approval, not just PUC commission approval. A few states also make it dependent on what the federal solution to the and storage of spent nuclear fuel is. And since we're still in the process of finding a solution that is acceptable to everyone in the industry, those bans for new nuclear power plants in those states remain in effect. And as Disha mentioned before as well, we do have a significant wave of coal retirements happening here over the next 10 years due to various reasons, economic pressures, environmental regulations that are coming in, simply aging, but also the pressure, like I said, same economic pressure that the nuclear plants have felt, also were felt by coal plants. And we have a significant infrastructure and workforce established in those energy communities. Again, most of these coal plants are actually oftentimes similar in size, either from what we're now talking about, those small modular reactors are, or even the well-established technology from nuclear plants that we have seen in the 1,000 megawatt range, and that you already have a lot of the transmission capabilities and oftentimes even cooling infrastructure. You'll see more detail on that in the actual paper, where there is potential there to reuse some of that cooling infrastructure that would be left behind by those retiring coal plants. And last but not least, again, we've already talked about those non-electricity positive impacts of nuclear plants. Retiring coal plants would take away a lot of the jobs out of the area, as well as a significant tax base by locating energy projects, clean energy projects like nuclear, would be a possibility or an option to retain some of that workforce and retain some of that tax base that those communities have learned to rely on. Last but not least, the key part about now how can our public utility commissioners across the country help ensure the retaining of the existing nuclear fleet and possibly encouraging a more closer look into how we can possibly expand the nuclear fleet across the country to meet our decarbonization goals that we've laid out in various states. First and foremost, we do have to differentiate between, as we saw on the map in the very beginning, between regulated energy markets and deregulated energy markets. Unfortunately, today, PUCs only have direct jurisdiction over a little more than half of the operating nuclear plants. It means the other half, or 44%, are located in deregulated markets. In deregulated states, the role of our public utility commissions and other state agencies are pretty much limited to administering whatever legislative programs are passed by state legislators that are supporting the nuclear fleet in that state, or are trying to encourage new nuclear development in their particular state. An example would be New York State's zero emission credit program. Here, again, this was passed by the state legislature to retain the existing nuclear fleet, and the role is down to the New York state agencies and commissions to make sure that those funds are appropriately reaching the plants that are covered under that program. Well, what can we do there? Maybe getting a little creative, and it depends on the states and how much support there is, but there might be a way to, even in deregulated states, include some of the cost recovery for nuclear plants through some rates within the states, where the utility commissions, again, would also have to weigh the costs and risk to their ratepayers in their state. In regulated states, where the utilities in their states have to submit integrated resource plans and get a commission approval for any of their resource changes that they're planning for in the future, there's significantly more influence that utility commissions have. And we listed a few examples here of what we think is possible. First, we already talked about this, but really examining the value of applying for all those initial licensing renewals or subsequent licensing renewals is really key to retaining the existing nuclear fleet. As we saw on the charts earlier, we do have a big wave coming in the 2030s, so making sure that the utilities are encouraged to really examine and making sure that they're applying for those subsequent licensing renewals is key to retain the existing fleet. In terms of new nuclear power plants, again, obviously ensuring that new nuclear power plants and the various technologies that are out there now are appropriately accounted for in those resource plans, including any and all available tax incentives or financial incentives, be it on the state or on the federal level. Again, as Disha's presented earlier, there are quite a few now, especially also on the federal level. So that will definitely help on the cost side. That is one of the biggest hurdles that these advanced nuclear reactor designs still have to prove, since again, utility commissions across the country have been quite burned by some of these cost overruns. So you would just want to talk to a South Carolina utility commissioner. They have quite a few things to say about that. And then last but not least, again, maybe also including some kind of provision that even if nuclear might not be in the preferred plan of a utility at this moment, include a case where like how the environment would have to change for nuclear to be part of a preferred resource mix for those utilities. That could be sensitivity on carbon prices or on the capital cost for new nuclear units, or a difference in renewable portfolio standards or clean energy standard levels here. With that, I know we went quite fast and there was a lot of information here. I promise you there's more information in the paper, but we'd be happy to take any and all questions that you have now.
Thank you, Philip and Deeksha. So we got the final product now, and I'm excited to dig back through it. Again, I did start the executive summary today, and I encourage our members to dig into it as well. But it's a great opportunity for us as regulators to make informed decisions going forward as we're trying to figure out how to solve this emissions-free world going forward. So thank you for your work here. I'm going to dig right into some questions. If anybody else has questions and would like to submit them, please put them in the Q&A box. Okay, so I'll leave you guys decide, Philip or Deeksha, who's going to answer. But do you think new nuclear projects are more likely to take advantage of the ITC or PTC under the new IRA tax frequency credit framework? And I think you pretty much covered that, but I'll throw it out there anyway.
Commissioner, very, very good question. And this is something, again, that we're always concerned about, right? It's like, it really depends. Based on our analysis, it really depends on how someone who's looking into this project is planning on operating it. Again, a levelized cost of energy that our industry likes to always look at significantly depends on the utilization rate or capacity factor for any new generation. So if a nuclear plant is built in support of variable renewable technology without any plans of using that maybe excess electricity, like Diksha mentioned, that capacity factor could be lower than maybe we see in today's nuclear fleet. And that would significantly impact the calculation and see which one, either the ITC or PTC, would be more beneficial. But generally, the higher the production rate, obviously, as the name entails, the more beneficial the production tax credit would be.
Very good. So Blair Fink asked the following question. Relicensing will depend on water availability for cooling. Drought conditions may play a major role in approval if this trend continues. How will MNRs be affected, the modulars?
Right. It really depends on the technology. We do have, as Diksha showed on the beautiful chart earlier, that's breaking down all the different technologies. We do have new reactor designs that are either relying on significantly less cooling water to operate, or even don't need cooling water at all. Again, all those designers and engineers are not living under the rock. Their main motivation is combating climate change and decarbonizing. So they're very well aware of the drought conditions that are now hitting the mainstream. Again, we've seen these drought conditions in many parts of the country for quite some time. So this is not news on that front. And then on the other hand, like I mentioned, and we actually have a beautiful chart that was from one of the national laboratories done in 2012 that we overlaid with coal retirements that are announced over the next 10 years, and overlaid that map of available or suitable sites for both conventional reactor designs and advanced reactor designs, and kind of show like where some of that overlap is. So as I mentioned, there is definitely possibilities and opportunities here to reuse some of that cooling infrastructure. Again, if you pull up a picture of any nuclear plant or for most nuclear plants in the US, you see these big canopy draft cooling towers that you also see at some of the coal plants. And so reusing some of those very big capital cost items could also help to, one, you're not actually taking more cooling water than you do in a coal plant, and two, bringing, again, that cost for those new nuclear reactor designs down as well.
One of the exciting things about some of these new technologies, I find, having been a former director of emergency preparedness, is the emergency planning zone some of these technologies shrink right to the boundary of the site. And it's not a 10-mile emergency planning zone, which has a lot of complications to it. And then, of course, some of these technologies don't require a lot of water. So there's a lot of various aspects of the potential new technologies, and some of them are very exciting to a nuclear nerd like myself. So another question. As utility regulators, we need to do our best to ensure that ratepayer dollars are being spent prudently to deliver affordable, reliable power. Advanced nuclear has a lot of potential to decarbonize baseload power, but it can also be a risky bet for customers, especially for stakeholders who witness the construction delays and cost overruns that nuclear plants have experienced over the past few decades. What advice would you have for regulators in other states interested in advanced nuclear on how to de-risk nuclear projects and maximize its benefit to ratepayers?
Very, very good question. And again, we've already, I think, touched on some of those, right? The VC Summer projects, 2 and 3 in South Carolina, that are 70-some% done, and were abandoned because of the cost overruns and all kinds of issues. Vogtle right now is heavily over budget, over time. I mean, and so we're TVA's projects here, and we still have some. Again, Diksha was mentioning the Columbia Generating Station in Washington State, and I believe there's, I think, like also a structure of another nuclear reactor that was supposed to be built there that's 65-70% done, and it's just standing there. So I understand where everyone's coming from. Like I said, the industry has been burned on that, and we are right now we're in this phase where no one wants to be first. No, everyone's hoping that it'll pan out, but no one really wants to be first. And with every adoption curve, right, it's a bell curve. You're always talking about the early adopters. So somebody has to be first, and once you get over that threshold, that's when you really start that wave of everyone else jumping in as well. So unfortunately, I think a lot of the technologies that are being developed do not have the issue that led to these cost overruns in our conventional nuclear designs. But you can't really prove that until those plants and designs are actually operating. And to do that, you need the funding. And as I mentioned before, the whole decarbonization discussion and moving towards that has really been a thing of the last 5 or 6 years. And there's a lot of, again, we are to some extent on the infancy of a lot of this, especially on the funding side. Again, Diksha went through, just the federal policy support that we have just now received through the Inflation Reduction Act, or even the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act from last year, is 2022. Now the key becomes making sure that those funds are appropriated accordingly or correctly to the most promising projects. And we are, like I said, we have a unique opportunity with those retiring coal plants where nuclear can play a role, but that is coming up very, very fast. So long story short, my advice would be, again, we're gathering all the resources that you have. I'm always a very big proponent of communication. Again, you have, as a utility commissioner, you have at least 49 other states that are probably thinking about the same question, and maybe have different answers or have other information. I think information sharing, like what we're doing today and what we hopefully kickstarted here, is key to reduce the risk associated with those projects. And then, unfortunately, somebody does have to be first, and we can all just cross our fingers and hope it works out, and it will start another wave of nuclear adoption here.
Yeah, very good. Let me get Diksha in here. Diksha, Nick Puga asks, in the absence of federal tax and other incentives, how do aging nuclear generating facilities such as Davis-Bessie provide higher value by dedicating their output to hydrogen production? And you mentioned Constellation's effort, and there was another one you mentioned already. So can you field that question for Mr. Puga?
Sure, definitely. It's basically by getting a little creative. So as the renewable penetration increases over time, based on all of these net zero goals that we have outlined, the biggest drawback really is to complement these intermittent technologies, right? So the ability to load follow. And if you get a little creative, co-generate hydrogen production with excess nuclear energy, then it'll essentially enable these plants to achieve a higher rate of operational flexibility, and also give it a more financial viability by creating another value-added product. In theory, these nuclear plants could better accommodate the seasonal fluctuations and increase their operational revenues in the absence of these federal tax incentives by using that generated hydrogen as an energy storage proxy. So during times when there's excess energy available, there's a lot of wind and solar production, the excess nuclear electricity can be utilized for hydrogen production, and that is then later fed back into the grid during times of high demand.
Very good, very good. Thank you. So another question, just toss it out there, whoever wants to handle it, from former Nuclear Regulatory Commission Commissioner Jeffrey Merrifield. Thanks for the report, he says. Did you all look at the temporal difference in different types of generation? That is, nuclear units can operate for 80 years, whereas solar and wind can only operate for 20 years before they need to be replaced. While the Vogtle units 1 and 2 in Georgia were the most expensive at the time they were first built, $9 billion, they are currently one of the reasons why power in Georgia has been so competitive.
Yeah.
In the 2000s.
That is correct. And I just wanted to tail off what Deeksha said there too, just real quick. We I don't know if everyone saw, but we did talk about X Energy as one of the companies that's working on these advanced nuclear reactor designs, and they actually are now partnering with Dow, or probably known as Dow Chemical. I don't know when they dropped the chemical. And we do see a lot of interest also in the industrial sector, where it's significantly harder to decarbonize some of these processes. And as Deeksha mentioned, we do have opportunities for hydrogen production. We have opportunities for access steam heat to use in those industrial processes, and obviously the electricity that could be generated. As you, Commissioner, mentioned, with the conventional reactor designs, we always have the 10-mile exclusion zone, so obviously that would prevent any significant industrial application. But the smaller the reactors get, and with the changes to maybe some of these like safety requirements based on the specific designs of those reactor designs, there is another opportunity here to decarbonize a sector that we have so far seen as notoriously difficult to decarbonize. In terms of former Commissioner Merrifield's question, very, very good point. And this is, I think, part that we tried to show earlier. As you could, and when you go through the slides or the papers later, you'll see the chart again where we had the production costs versus power prices or wholesale power prices, and you could see that the prices were very, very consistent. One, it really protects you against big fluctuations in international markets. Again, natural gas prices more than doubled here just over the last year. Coal prices are sitting at record highs as well. And nuclear prices are relatively unaffected. Relatively, everything's affected by inflation, but that's a different discussion. So yeah, you definitely, once those projects are online, and that's why we're first and foremost advocating for the retention of the existing nuclear fleet, is they are providing very reliable, as we've seen from the NARUC data, very consistently affordable electricity, and it's carbon free. So I know there's one question already in the Q&A box that's talking about what's the biggest drawback of nuclear. Well, the biggest drawback, unfortunately, so far is still what do we do with the spent nuclear fuel, right? And there is some more information out there too. I do want to put it a little bit into perspective as to like how much spent nuclear fuel we're talking about. It is minuscule if you compare it to how much coal ash we're accumulating in the US every single day or every single year. And as we've seen with some of the coal ash spills and everything, there is some significant health and environmental impact associated with that as well. So it is significantly small. At this point, we can just store our spent nuclear fuel on site. But yes, that is definitely something that either we have to think about how to figure out a long-term storage, or how can we best reuse or recycle some of that spent fuel. But yeah, that would be what I see so far as being the biggest drawback for more nuclear.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you for a very informative paper and presentation. We're going to dig into it, and this will be a big asset for us as commissioners and commission staff. So we'll give you the proverbial round of applause to Philip and Deeksha for your time today, and the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy for supporting this webinar. The Nuclear Partnership is planning a webinar on nuclear provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is scheduled for September 16th. Registration for this webinar will be emailed out to the Nuclear Energy Partnership listserv soon. Today is the deadline to submit an abstract for NARUC's annual meeting and education conference. If you'd like to submit an abstract, Catherine will post a link in the chat box for the abstract submission page. And check the NARUC's website for information on other upcoming activities, and please reach out to Kira and Catherine and NARUC with any questions or feedback. Philip and Deeksha, thank you. Thank you for the attendees for coming. It looks like we had a pretty good turnout here today, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner.